Okay, we're just about to get started with our second armchair discussion. This is the second of 4. We will have this armchair discussion followed by lunch, which you are all invited to right here. And then we will have our 2 armchair discussions after lunch, which will round out the day before our reception. This second armchair discussion is on supporting platforms for collaborative governance. We have a short video that helps show you how we and our partners have defined collaborative governance, and we will start just now.
It's a pity that the 3.5 million people are staring at hunger. I mean, the government and line ministries are running up and down distributing food. Honestly, it should not be the function of the ministry of the government to supply food. Food can be produced by the farmers, can be organized by the farmers, can be distributed by the farmers themselves, given the right infrastructural arrangements.
One way to understand collaborative governance is to think about it as a model of making decisions, designing and implementing policy that involves not just government decision makers, but private sector, the community, other non-state actors, not just to be consulted during the development, but actually giving decision-making power to stakeholders, true stakeholders outside of the government. So you've got not only a diversity of perspective and skills and resources being brought to bear when policies are being designed, but by extension, that group of stakeholders involved and committed to implementation.
So the why is this important is because of that process that took place, you end up, the results of that project are that all the different sectors that are considered are benefited from it. They're all considered and benefited from it, and all the different stakeholders are benefited as well. And this is really important for self-reliance. You're not left with, as in the first case, you're not left with a community that has learned nothing from this experience. And actually, worse, they just feel relegated to this beneficiary passive role. What you have in the good case, where they were participating, is this understanding of and beginning to practice having a role in this participatory process and being at the same table with all these other stakeholders. And so you create platforms for these sorts of communities.
Our coordination of the various sectors is done at a level, a neutral, government body, and therefore reporting will be done regularly. These assessments will be done, and the information required will be available. The participation of the communities, because they prepare their own food, they're the ones who do the farming. I think we need to engage them more and more. So we should have a system whereby we are able to reach every community.
Le leadership, il est devenu collectif. Ce n'était pas un ou une institution qui l'exerçait, c'était tous ensemble, tous nos partenaires ensemble, au sein de l'agriculture, que ce soit le secteur privé, que ce soit la société civile, que ce soit les institutions du gouvernement qui soutiennent l'agriculture, tous ils ont exercé un leadership collectif pour pouvoir travailler durant les différentes phases, que ce soit l'élaboration des politiques, que ce soit le suivi des politiques, et même l'évaluation. On a pu construire avec eux de telle sorte que, aujourd'hui, le fait de pouvoir s'asseoir, de s'accorder, de revoir ensemble les engagements, de revoir ensemble, d'évaluer la façon dont ils ont travaillé pour pouvoir après améliorer les processus.
To facilitate this panel on collaborative governance, I'd like to introduce our Chief of Party, Steve Smith.
Thank you, Helen. It's great to be here after many years working on this project in different capacities and in different places of the world. But it really is a pleasure, especially to have all these the folks from Africa who've come to visit and share their lessons and experiences with us. So I'd like to start by introducing the panel. If the panel could come up here, please, to sit down. Just, you can all please just take a seat. You can sit here. That's good. Or either way, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Oh, if you're already told, that's fine. Yeah, go ahead. Constance. Okay, we've got an empty seat there. Okay, I'd like to introduce the different panel members. At my left, we have David Jacobstein, who's the Democracy Specialist in USAID, Center of Excellence on Democracy, Human Rights, and Governance. As a thought leader in this space, David will share some USAID perspectives and raise questions on collaborative governance and lessons learned for addressing, in particular, political economy issues. Next to David is Constance Okeke. Constance is the project manager of public finance for agriculture with ActionAid International, working out of Nigeria. Constance will reflect on the perspectives of non-state actors and their increasingly important but often underappreciated role in national, regional, and continental agricultural development processes. The next panelist is Rick O'Sullivan. Rick O'Sullivan is principal and co-founder Change Management Solutions. Rick has extensive experience in supporting and studying collaborative governance efforts with a focus on organizational strengthening. Rick will reflect on his global experience and share lessons learned on collaborations among the private sector, civil society, and the public sectors. Our next panelist is Robert Ouma. Robert Ouma is an economist with a background in research, and Robert has a very unique perspective because he has been involved in collaborative governance both as a stakeholder, I think I just lost this, didn't I? Both as a stakeholder and as a facilitator of collaborative processes. It's on? Okay. And then finally, we have Ibrahima Fall. Ibrahima is with the Senegal National Council for Rural Dialogue and Cooperation, the CNCR. The CNCR is a national apex-level organization that coordinates and represents rural organizations of Senegal. As a member of CNCR, Ibrahima will talk about its experiences, especially with regard to working with Senegal's variety of government institutions. So we heard from the last panel, and I think there were some assumptions about agriculture being a multi-stakeholder challenge requiring collaboration. So in the spirit of evidence and respect for some researchers who might be in the audience, I'm going to do a quick verification exercise with your participation. So I'd like to ask you some questions, and unlike the African rain, what was it, the rain clap? Okay, we're going to do the American sky reach, okay? So you're going to raise your hands. That's how you're going to participate. You're going to raise your hands. First question, have you been involved, and this is for everybody, who's been involved in designing or implementing an important development project or program? Is there anyone who hasn't, I should say, but has everyone? Raise your hands, here too. It's just about everybody, right? Large majority of people. Now I'd like you to take a couple seconds to think about the main stakeholders, those who were affected by the program and those who had an interest in the outcomes. A lot of these were mentioned in the last panel. We have government stakeholders, we have communities, we have research institutions, private sector, don't forget them. Donor institutions themselves are stakeholders. So I'd like you to think about those different stakeholders, both stakeholder institutions as well as just generally interest groups. And I'd like to ask the following question. How many of you who raised your hand first, who were involved in these projects, their project only had one stakeholder involved? Did anyone have just one stakeholder involved in their project? Okay, nobody. He's itching his nose, so scratching his nose, so that doesn't count. Okay, how many of you had only 2 or 3 stakeholders involved in your project? Were there any of you that just had a very limited, sort of like the researchers that George was talking about, that he works with, those PhDs that might have only had 2 or 3? Anyone just 2 or 3? Okay, how many of you had 3 or more? Or 4 or more, I'm sorry, 4 or more, more than 3. Okay, that's just about everyone. So I think I've been able to verify that all of our work is multi-stakeholder work and requires collaboration. But let's ask ourselves, I just want to take a minute here to reflect on this. Let's ask ourselves, how good are we at working in a multi-stakeholder context? Do we have the expertise? Do we even know what are the skills and the behaviors and the experience that's needed to participate effectively in a multi-stakeholder context? When we select people in our institutions, and we do that, right, to represent our institutions in a multi-stakeholder process, do we think about this? Do we send them into that process knowing that they're the right people to participate effectively in a multi-stakeholder process? And if they don't, do we offer them specialized training or coaching to be able to do it better? Think about that. You know, in our own organizations, we all work on these things. We develop our mission, our principles, our structures, our systems for which our organization is going to work effectively. You know, we even hire consultants who are experts in this, who go to universities, postgraduate programs, in organizational development, who are specialized to help us. But do we have something similar for the multi-stakeholder process? Or do we just have a facilitator that we hire and we hope that he's going to be able to smooth the process and everything will come out okay? So I think the point here is that we're all involved in this multi-stakeholder process and that we've got a lot to learn about how to do it better and how to participate more effectively. And I'm hoping that this panel can help clarify and give us some of the answers to those questions. I just want to remind you, please, if you could limit your initial comments to just 3 or 4 minutes. I'm going to give a question to each one of you, and so that we can have perhaps a little bit more dynamic discussion after that. Let me start with Rick. Okay. Rick, based on your experience, what is collaborative governance and why is it important? What are the key factors for a successful process and outcome?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that question, Steve. In fact, he told me beforehand last Thursday that remarks were limited to 4 minutes, and being Irish, I understood that that meant a scripted response. So although this may seem a little awkward, just appreciate that you're watching some real personal self-awareness here. Now, what distinguishes collaborative governance from any other form of advocacy? Webster defines collaboration as a process between 2 or more entities working together to complete a task or achieve a goal. Collaboration, therefore, does more than just advise and recommend. Collaborator participates in the process and, more importantly, shares responsibility for the outcome. For example, to better inform the diaspora, the Pakistani Center for Philanthropy created a set of standards and auditing process to identify legitimate nonprofit organizations. The PCP invited the Federal Revenue Service to participate in every step in developing both the goals and the standards and the auditing process. Consequently, the FRS, in turn, recognized the PCP certification as proof of tax exemption status, thereby transferring the authority to determine what is a nonprofit from the government to the nonprofit sector. This both reduced the government's cost, eliminated potential corruption, and also created demand and revenue for the organization. The end goal of any policy is to influence economic and social behaviors and outcomes. This can be done 3 ways: through market forces, social approbation and pressure, and government regulation. Successful policy engages all 3, including direct participation by civil society in governance in a form of a three-legged stool that is more stable and more sustainable than conventional confrontational advocacy that is very common. And that's why one finds private, public, and nonprofit organizations working side by side in every social objective, each serving a unique population or need, and not competing with, but complementing each other in achieving those goals. In an increasingly globalized economy in which no government can possibly possess the authority to regulate, collaborative governance, including the civil society, has become essential to ensure market transparency and competitiveness, especially for developing markets. Independent voluntary water users associations, for example, now manage the access to water for 75% of the world's arable land, which produces 50% of the world's food production. Businesses without any experience in collaborative civil society governance will be at a competitive disadvantage in today's global economy. While some might think that governments would resist nonprofits having regulatory authority, my experience is quite to the contrary. On learning that civil society organizations would no longer just remain the government's watchdogs criticizing from the sidelines, but actually climb into the arena and become part of the process in achieving an objective and being held responsible and accountable, the response I get from government agencies is, when can they start? In closing, it is illustrative that to be empowered in French is se responsabiliser. A reflexive. An organization is not empowered by others. It becomes empowered by accepting responsibility for the desired outcome and acting as a partner with, not just a critic of, the government in delivering solutions. At the registration desk, I have provided some handouts that give more detail about third-party governance. I accept in both English and French, for those of you. I invite you all to take them, and if there aren't enough, let me know, and I'll make sure to get one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. I think Rick was able to explain that sort of the ultimate case of collaborative governance, where it's not just having a seat at the table, but it's actually taking a responsibility, non-governmental organizations taking the responsibility to execute policy and to implement programs themselves.
In 4 minutes, I might add.
Very, very good, very good. And it sounds novel, but it actually is more common than we think, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to move to David. David, the topic of collaboration is increasingly important for USAID. What are your thoughts about the questions that need to be answered, as well as the solutions from a programming perspective?
Thanks, Steve, and thank you for having me here, sitting in the Democracy, Rights, and Governance Center. We've collaborated with you all in the Bureau for Food Security for a long time, and I consider the Africa Lead program to be a standout program in good governance because of a lot of the ways that you go about the work that you've been doing and collaborating with partners. So I think there's an awful lot for us to learn as well, so I really appreciate the chance to be here. I think it's a good question. It's something that is getting increased attention, particularly with the focus on Journey to Self-Reliance. And part of that is because there's been research for a long time, but I think we're becoming increasingly aware of the value of relationships and how those are framed and structured and set up, not just in terms of accomplishing the outcomes that we are aiming towards, but also in how those really enable self-reliance, which fundamentally depends on groups of people being able to adapt to new conditions emerging, new situations obtaining, whether good or bad. And so in that sense, I think the push for us to figure out how can USAID better support countries, societies on the journey to self-reliance makes us pay attention to the ways in which relationships are built and used because that's so fundamental to adaptiveness and to the capacity to survive and thrive through different possible futures. I think that has, as you say, it's not something that's new, and it's something that we have probably been aware of for a long time and viewed as a nice extra. And I think that goes to the heart of what needs to change within USAID and within the programming space. And a lot of this we heard in the discussion on facilitative leadership. But one of the questions, I think, is how can we try to give certainty and offer accountability that through collaborative actions and collaborative platforms, we are going to achieve results. There's a lot of great evidence that can be powerfully effective in the right instances. And I think one of the things that has held it back in the space of donor programming and probably also within countries as governments relate to their non-state actors has been, yes, but I need somebody who's going to promise me that this is going to lead to that and who will be accountable if it doesn't work. And a collaborative model is much more of an investment in the group and saying we're going to come together and try to do something collectively because we think that's more likely to succeed. But the trade-off is the acknowledgement that neither way is certain. And it's a lot easier to promise certainty than to acknowledge uncertainty and embrace the risk that that implies, even though that is something that we're hearing lots of messages about having a higher risk tolerance and being more ambitious in pursuit of transformative goals. So I think that's something that we need to be aware of as a question is what are we going to offer in the stead of promises that we are certainly going to get somewhere, and if we don't, you can hold this person accountable because they are directly responsible for it, for a broader effort and for what that means for responsibility and accountability along the chain and within these platforms. The other thing I would note, and it was the question Helen posed in the first panel, was there are all sorts of information asymmetries and power asymmetries. And we obviously want to support inclusive voices in policy making and to improve policy outcomes. But the truth is that as much as we can inform discussions with real, tangible evidence, there are different opinions over what is better. There are different opinions over what the right answers are. And it can be difficult to have different voices come to the table and shape conversations in ways where disagreement can be respectful, where you can move toward some consensus without settling for just the least common denominator of where there can be some sort of agreement. And I think there's some very real questions for all of the actors over how we can appreciate disagreement and still find ways to move forward, and how we can address information asymmetries and power asymmetries in ways that can support different goals of different stakeholders and interest groups while realizing meaningful collaboration, because I've seen an awful lot of platforms be established where the focus was on the platform for collaboration, and really it's the people who determine whether the collaboration succeeds. And so I think that it's a great model and it's a great mental model for us to have of can we see if this is working, how will we know? But I think we need to bear in mind the critical importance of being able to surface and grapple with real power dynamics in the course of the work we're pursuing and be honest about where we may disagree and find ways to work together anyway.
Thank you, David. Some of what you said reminded me of when I first started learning about development and what really strong economic development owes to, and sort of the main conclusion was often about the strength of a country's institutions. And what you're arguing for right really now is that it's really about the institutionalization of multi-institution work. So we've got a big challenge there, don't we? So I'd like to move to Robert now. And I'd like to start getting into some of the more specific instances that we can bring out about collaborative governance. And Robert, in your role supporting and participating Kenya's recent National Agricultural Strategy development process, what were some of the challenges that you saw around collaboration?
All right, thank you very much, Steve, and I'm really happy to sit on this panel with you guys. Some of you might know that Kenya just launched this year, actually, a new agriculture strategy. It's called the Agricultural Transformation and Growth Strategy. It covers a 10-year period, 2019 to 2029. In and of itself, it's an interesting strategy. You can Google it and check it out. But I think for the purposes of our conversation, it's more about the process that we went through to get that strategy in place, which had a lot of the elements that would be described as collaborative governance, especially at the beginning. And we were part of that as Africa Lead in a facilitation role. And I think some of the, I'll come to the challenges in a moment, but I think one could split that process into two. There was a first part of the process that was quite good. It had a lot of really positive elements, brought together a lot of different players from government. And when I say government, we've got both the county governments, which are devolved units, as well as national government, what would probably be described as federal government in the US versus states. And all of them have got a role to play in agriculture, so they have to be at the table. And then we had non-state actors, a whole range of them, from farmer groups to the umbrella organization of non-state actors in Kenya. It's called the AGCK, and others, as well as private sector, researchers, academia, policy think tanks like Tegemeo Institute and others, some of you might be familiar with. So it was a very broad group of stakeholders sitting together, convened by the government of Kenya, with the Agriculture Secretary, the Permanent Secretary, the minister involved, and saying what should be our agriculture strategy for the next 10 years. So the elements of what would be a very interesting case study of collaborative governance were all in place at the beginning, and it went really smoothly for a while. So in terms of challenges, one of the challenges, just drawing from that example, is a cultural clash, I would describe it, where you've got different players from different sectors whose organizations have different cultures. How the private sector operates is very different from how government operates. One might be a little bit more bureaucratic than the other one focused on some metrics and results and timelines and thinking about resources, maybe others not so much. And so bringing these players together with their different cultural, organizational cultures is really, really difficult. The other one is the general cost in terms of time as well as resources. When you have got an increasingly expanding list of players that need to be at the table, that's one big challenge to consider. And some even say that if you have such a big set of players and it's very costly, is it really worth it? Quickly, a few other challenges. The different positions and interests of the different players around the table. And when I say positions, meaning what they actually say at the table, what they think, they state to be the things that they would like to see in the strategy versus what their real interest is. Sometimes not the same things. And it's hard to cut through all of that. And that was not easy. There were issues like political interference or political interests that needed to be taken care of. Agriculture in many African countries is highly political. There are so many people involved. This is what might influence how voting patterns are, etc. So obviously you've got to contend with the political economy aspects of it. So these are some of the challenges that affect how, when you want to collaborate, things work out. And just to mention real quick, Steve, that the role of a facilitator, a neutral facilitator, and sometimes I say neutral facilitator, some people think that means you do not necessarily have ideas and thoughts about the process. Neutral but not naive is therefore very critical to help create the space for all these players to come together.
Can we use this facilitative leader?
Yes, yes, a facilitative leader would be good. And in the Kenyan process, there were some really excellent examples of facilitative leadership. In this case, one of the people that was driving this process, Anne Onyango, who just retired as Agriculture Secretary in Kenya, was quite facilitative in her approach. But also the facilitative leadership of the facilitating organization or organizations. And we generally tend to call some of this support for this kind of collective impact processes as backbone support, which exists. Sometimes you don't notice it, you don't feel it, except when it's not there. That's when you realize, oh, we need this. And then things move very smoothly, and Africa Lead in the background and having Anne Onyango providing overall leadership really worked well in the initial stages. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Perhaps later you can talk a little bit about that second stage where things didn't work out that well. We'd like to hear a little bit about that. Thank you. I'd like to move to Constance now and ask her. You work with a lot of non-state actors. How much space do you see for NSAs to engage? What have government entities done or not done to let NSAs into the process? And what can NSAs do themselves to be more effective in getting a seat at the table?
All right, thank you, Steve. I'm getting 3 questions, and I will try as much as possible to respond. Listening to the first session, I was really happy to hear Jeff talk about the role he played in, bringing people together, and it brought back some memories for me, because I remember that in 2011 in Entebbe, we were already interacting with the African Union, the DRE units precisely, on how we participate in their plans and engagements as different organizations. I was there as ActionAid, and we had another group from one, each and every one of us struggling to get our own space. And we were describing the things we wanted to do for the year of family farming in 2012. And Jeff just listened to all the things we were saying while sipping his coffee and just said, ladies, have you tried thinking of working as a team? And we looked at ourselves and we were like, yeah, we could actually do that, because that would make it a better way of engagement, pulling resources together and working as a group. And that gave rise or birth to the CNC, that is the Cardiff Non-State Actors Coalition, which comprises different sectors of the non-state actors, the women farmer groups, the youth group, the media, the civil society group, the farmer umbrella organizations. And with the support of African Lead, that structure has done a lot of things and is still working. And we've tried to see how we strengthen those structures at the national level and also at the regional level. But then, back to Rick, I liked your positions about private-public partnership. But for me, I think it would be better referred to as people-public partnership, because collaborative governance has to do with giving people their right to participate and get involved in policy processes. Because collaborative governance focuses on issues of policies, and then for that to be very strong, there has to be an element of accountability. The civil society group cannot just only play the role of being partners. We still also need to play our role as watchdogs. And then coming to the space is shrinking, at the same time getting more enriching, and we've had opportunities and spaces to participate and engage. We've had opportunities of engaging with the Cardiff processes from the onset till now, and we get involved in the summits where we engage as a platform, as a group, working down from the community level, national level, up to the continental level. We also engage at the regional economic communities where we are part of the joint sector review at the regional level. And at the national level, which is where the main work is, we have these platforms engaging national governments, state governments, and at the local level, having parliamentary engagements, briefings, where we do budget analysis work as a group, use the information to have evidence-based advocacy. And the beautiful thing about doing that is that it creates an equal space for everybody, because even within the non-state actors platforms, there are power dynamics. You find out that, yes, some other organizations that are more international or more stronger in terms of strength as an organization might have more opportunities than the local ones that hitherto will not have those spaces. But working as a collaborative, it's a lot easier for us to give space for everybody, to provide voice, and then also issues to be brought on board. There are a lot of groups that we've worked with. I've talked about the CNC. We have the Women Farmers Platform in the different countries. And more recently, the very strong one now is the Rural Women Farmers Forum, the Kili women, the women that came together to climb the Kilimanjaro mountain to push for their issues on land, and a whole lot of them. But then, all this wouldn't have been possible if the key stakeholders, which are the policymakers, are not doing certain things well, or not doing certain things in not a very opportunity for us to engage. But I'll focus more on what they are doing well. They've been able to provide opportunity for invitations to be partners in committees, working groups, providing relevant information as at when needed, providing technical support in terms of knowledge sharing, capacity building for these platforms, also inviting us to meetings, opening up spaces, at times to supporting with resources for us to come, though we still think there's room for improvement in that area, because if you think we are equal players that we need to be on the table, there should be deliberate effort to ensure that we have equal opportunity to attend these meetings. Because at times you go for some meetings, talking about farmers, you look around the hall, you don't even see a single farmer. And then how do you ensure that their issues are brought on the table? Because in Africa, you say you don't shave somebody's head at his absence. It needs to be on the table to be able to push for some of these issues. But then again, more importantly is their availability. And when I talk about availability, they're being reachable. Like, for example, I know if I need an information from the AUC, Godfrey is the director, but I can text him on my phone. He will respond. I can call any of his team, the elder, the different groups. We're able to, have that personal relationship, which has gone a long way, to help us, interface and then push for our issues. But like I said, there's still room for improvement because we still need more of that space, to engage. As non-state actors, how do we effectively organize, to be having more space on the seats and to, share our views? Basically, what we do is to mobilize, we organize, we plan, engage, and then review the processes we have, put in place. And a more recent space we've had is being part of the biannual review process. There's a committee that has been set up, ably facilitated by the AUC DRE, and we are part of this process, and it has given us opportunity to also not just holding them accountable to some of the commitments, but also taking on our own responsibilities as non-state actors, and then also being ready to account for that. And that has helped us bring to the table some of the ideas we think would work and has worked in the past. Because yes, we at times get confrontational, we at times try to be the watchdog, but it's all done in good faith because we think that policymakers need to be held accountable at all times. And to do that, you don't just criticize, you also provide solutions and then also work as a partner to see how that is achieved. We've been able to do that. And we also clearly articulate our goals, our objective of engagement, and have a workable strategy, which we review from time to time to see where we've had failures and where we've had achievements, how do we build on that, and then where we have lessons to learn, we also do that. And then we try to have a mechanism to share information from the top to the bottom and also generate data from bottom to up so that we are not just advocating, but we have an evidence. So for example, you have the women farmers sharing their lived experiences, speaking at events, bringing up solutions that would solve their problem because they are the ones wearing the shoes, so they know where it pinches. So all those things helps us utilize the capacities we have within our constituency. And then from time to time, we seek support to get capacity built so that we can, improve on what we do.
Thank you, Constance.
Yeah.
Thanks. This is the first time we've actually met, but you made some powerful points, and they're the ones that very similar to what we've been learning in the project over many years. One point you made, which I thought was really interesting, was about actually doing things together. It's not just about once in a while going to a meeting and sitting at the table with people and then waiting till the next meeting occurs, but actually doing things together. And you'll hear more about that this afternoon with some of our panelists, particularly Edwin from our office in in Nairobi will give a great example of policy through learning together. So I'd like to move to Ibrahima. Ibrahima is going to speak in French, and Dela is going to translate for him. Ibrahima, CNCR works with national non-state actors to coordinate dialogue in CAADP and other fora. Can you share from your experience what are the best practices for getting things done with government and other non-state actors?
Alors, Ibrahima, le CNCR travaille avec les acteurs non étatiques dans le processus du CAADP. Est-ce que vous pourriez partager avec nous les meilleures pratiques dans ce cadre?
Merci beaucoup, Steve. C'est un plaisir pour moi d'être là pour participer à ce panel. Bon, au Sénégal, c'est vrai que nous avons pas mal d'expérience parce que dans le cadre du PDDA, la mise en œuvre, à la première phase, on avait des problèmes de coordination avec les acteurs pour une participation effective.
Okay, thanks for inviting me. I'd like to share a point here. During the NIPE elaboration process, we had some challenges working together with the other stakeholders.
Bon, maintenant, à la suite de larges concertations avec le gouvernement, les acteurs s'étaient structurés. Bon, il y avait un long processus de plaidoyer jusqu'à 2014 où l'USAID a appuyé la société civile pour mettre en place le groupe de dialogue social et politique qui réunit l'ensemble des acteurs non étatiques.
Okay, what the various actors did is that they structured themselves, they organized themselves to be more able to speak as one voice with the government. And when USAID arrived with its support in 2014, things got better.
Et ce groupe, depuis sa création aussi, est reconnu par le gouvernement. Et c'est une instance qui est inscrite dans l'architecture institutionnelle pour la mise en œuvre du PDDA au Sénégal.
So now the new group, the new platform is well recognized by the government and as well as a key part of the Senegal institutional architecture for the NIPE implementation.
Et le groupe est aussi représenté dans les autres instances de prise de décision, comme le comité de pilotage que le chef de gouvernement dirige et le comité technique que le ministre de l'Agriculture préside.
The platform is also attending other stakeholders, organizations, other public platforms. Yeah.
Et depuis aussi bientôt 2 ans, avec l'appui de Africa Lead aussi, nous avons pu installer des comités au niveau local. Et dans 6 régions du Sénégal, Africa Lead a appuyé le groupe à installer des comités régionaux pour articuler avec la décentralisation et faciliter la participation des communautés au niveau local. Et là aussi, ça nous a permis avec Africa Lead de travailler chaque année sur des rapports de contribution que la société civile élabore pour évaluer l'état de mise en œuvre du PDDA au Sénégal. Et ce rapport est pris en compte aussi dans le rapport national que l'État présente.
Okay, with support from Africa Lead, we've created local technical communities at the district level in 6 regions of Senegal, and everything which is produced at the local level is used at the global level.
Et pour le processus aussi de de formulation du PNIA-ZAN, qui est la 2e génération qui vient d'être finalisée, Là aussi, le groupe a organisé des concertations au niveau local pour recueillir les préoccupations des communautés à la base et formuler aussi un rapport de contribution qui est déposé sur la table de l'État. Et la plupart des orientations aussi ont aidé l'État à aligner les politiques aux besoins prioritaires des communautés qui sont au niveau local.
Okay, our platform organized a couple of consultative workshops to get the more inclusive participation of NSAs in the NIPE process. So everything we discussed and produced was included in the NIPE document, was taken into account.
Et c'est un groupe aussi qui est inscrit dans le document national. Les missions du groupe sont reconnues et inscrites aussi dans le document de Peña-Zan au Sénégal. Et avec ça aussi, nous organisons chaque année des concertations avec les populations d'abord pour socialiser le Peña-Zan, mais aussi des concertations sous forme de dialogue politique avec l'État pour orienter un peu les politiques, les décisions.
Okay, so as part of our participation to the NIPE process, we, every year we organize consultative workshops, both with the population, the local population, and with the government to make sure we have an inclusive process.
Voilà pour le moment les quelques cas de succès que nous avons rencontrés au Sénégal, en attendant les autres questions.
So this could be considered as a success in Senegal.
Thank you very much, Ibrahima. I think Ibrahima started to talk a little bit about institutionalization of collaborative governance. And the question I would like to get back to and ask some of the other panelists, if you can just put this in the back of your mind, though, can collaborative governance be institutionalized and sustained over time and not just something that happens for brief moments to achieve short-term goals? It's kind of like the question of facilitative leadership, can it be learned? So I'd like to open it up for a few more questions to the panel, and there's one in particular that I mentioned before that I feel like was not covered quite as well as I'd like to see it, and that is, are there instances when things didn't work, where multi-stakeholder collaboration went wrong, and if so, why?
Est-ce que vous avez des
Well, this is, okay. Ibrahima, yes, you may answer that first. If you just take about a minute to do that, and I'll give somebody else in the panel a chance as well. Yeah.
Ok. Est-ce que vous avez un ou des exemples spécifiques de cas où le dialogue entre les différentes parties prenantes n'a pas marché, a été complètement bloqué, et pourquoi?
Bon, ça existe quand même dans le Peña 1. En un moment, le dialogue était un peu bloqué et la société civile était même allée jusqu'à vouloir boycotter la signature du pacte.
So during the first NIPE process, the dialogue was obstructed and the civil society was up to resign, to give up and not participate to the process.
Voilà. Maintenant, là aussi, c'était juste lié au fait que il y avait un problème de compréhension entre l'État et la société civile sur certaines orientations du Peña-Zan.
So this was due to a misunderstanding between the government and the civil society on their various interests and objectives.
Okay.
Mais tout ça aussi a été résolu à la suite de larges aussi concertations avec l'État. Et on était parvenu aussi à trouver un terrain d'entente.
So we finally, finally got into a consensus after a larger collaborative work with the government.
Thank you, Ibrahima. Is there somebody else from the panel that would like to answer that question?
Yeah.
Yes, please, Rick.
Yeah, in my experience, trying to, or working with civil society organizations to change the headset from from the confrontational to a more collaborative approach has been, requires a lot of work on behalf of leadership to change that role. And also the point that you raised about conflict of interest. Yes, there are conflicts of interest when civil society takes on a governance position. However, the alternative, as I mentioned before, the end result of any policy is to influence economic and social behaviors. When all the levers to influence economic and social behaviors are turned over to the government, you have created the opportunity for the closing of civil society space. That they will take advantage of that. And so there is a trade-off here. But with civil society, in terms of the conflicts of interest, yes, because of the greater transparency, they are more easily managed. But the difficulty for civil society is to see itself not just as providing solutions to the government, but as the solution is a major transformation for a lot of organizations.
Thank you, Rick. Yes, Robert, briefly, then I'll move on to the next one.
All right, really brief. I did mention that in the case, I mean, Kenya has made policies before, so this is just a specific case. And in that strategy process, it started off well, at least in my analysis, and very collaborative. The rules were set. There was consensus around both the process and the content, and multiple stakeholders in the room, and there would be meetings every Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. in the boardroom of the permanent secretary, and everything was hunky-dory. But then somewhere along the line, the process changed, and now there were fewer stakeholders involved, and there was a need to have maybe a consultant or two go and write up the strategy quickly to speed up the process. But that wasn't socialized with everybody. And therefore, the product faced some challenges because it wasn't owned. And there were questions around why. Why did you change? So it's really important that if there's going to be something that will change, it is communicated and shared with everybody and agreed upon. So you just basically start the way you mean to go in a collaborative governance process. And in that particular example, I think that the cost of managing the ownership after the strategy was developed it took another year, probably a year and a half, to consult with different stakeholders and get them now to accept the product and say, this is the strategy and we can now pass it and so on, which would have been avoided if they were just included as was the initial intention. So I think there are some interesting insights from that process.
Robert, I think everybody wants to know what changed. Anything that's said here stays here, I promise you. just.
No, I mean, I think.
Don't believe him.
I got to believe. I think that the key issue here is, as I said earlier, there's a lot of politics in strategy development, especially in agriculture, and there's different interests. And when a process looks like it will have a big influence on the outcomes, sometimes, and we were talking about power imbalances earlier, those stakeholders with a lot more power around the decision making, usually it's people in government who have the mandate, the positional mandate to make these decisions. And they can very easily be either distracted sometimes or listen more to one side or the other. So there needs to be a lot of balance. I think in this particular case, it was more of a question of some partners feeling that they needed to have a greater say in the process and lead it and finance it and produce the strategy towards a particular type of strategy. And that's I don't think it's strange, it's typical, it just needs to be managed because people, given the space, will always want to push things in their direction. Yeah. It's not going to be...
human nature, isn't
it?
Yeah,
it's nature.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, that's what we're trying to correct or change. Yeah. Quickly. So last question to the panel before we open it up to a couple questions here to the audience. David, if you could address the question I was asking earlier about whether collaborative governance is something that can be institutionalized and sustained, and then maybe Constance can make a couple comments about that as well.
Sure, and I think that's an excellent question, and really goes to the heart of when collaborative governance succeeds and fails, which is that it depends so much on trust and on credibility of the actors who are involved. And so sustaining it, I think the misstep is often to view the existence of a platform, and this can be multi-stakeholder, this can be just an apex institution within the private sector or civil society, this can be any number of platforms are established, often instrumentalized to get to a consensus process for a particular decision, and then there's a desire to say, oh, well, that worked pretty well, let's keep the thing around because that thing is what made it work. Which misses the point that it's actually the way people were interacting, the trust that they built up, the time that they spent, and the credibility that they obtained. And credibility and trust are very hard things to achieve and very easy things to lose. And so I think it is possible, and conversely, in many cases where multi-stakeholder kind of collaborative governance type behavior endures over time, it may be around one topic area, around one particular platform, and then morph to another one when another opportunity comes up. And so I think that it's really for all of the different stakeholders to go into the engagements believing and understanding that their interlocutors, that their other people around the table are going to be there, are going to press for their interests, are going to matter to a decisional space for many years to come. And finding ways to work together through a platform, through all demonstrating some facilitative leadership, because I don't think that's a thing that just a particular convener needs to bring. That's something that everybody involved needs to bring as a way, as an orientation and a way of working with each other. Then I think you can have something that endures, and even you can have something that is fairly well established and has some specific resources, some specific procedures that last for a long time. When people mistake the resources and procedures for the actual collaborative engagement, then you can have something that appears on paper to last for a long time, but very quickly becomes irrelevant to the actual decisional space that it's involved in. So I think, yes, you can have something sustained, but you have to know why something sustains and be in a position to judge with everybody involved, is this still working, why or why not? How do we continue it, and view that as more important than the specific functional platform that it sits on top of.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Constance, do you have a few thoughts on that?
Yeah. In addition to what he said, two examples come to mind, and the first one would be how we collaborated with other non-state actors, and then with support from the AUC and the RESACs and also the AUC Development Agency to come up with a strategy to ensure that everybody is carried along, especially in terms of the biennial review process. We realized that being a process that was promoting mutual accountability in terms of implementing the CAADP, we felt if the voices were supposed to be heard from everybody, we needed to have tools and mechanisms to generate information. Because we know the biennial review process is very technical, as non-state actors, we felt, how do we capture the voice of the smallholder farmer in the community who plays a major role in the CAADP process, who is also supposed to be benefiting? We came up with what we call the VAP kit. That is the Value Add Biennial Review Toolkit, which is less technical, very participatory in nature to use. And we jointly developed that, got technical notes from the government agencies, like I said earlier. And this has helped the farmers feel like they're part of the process. So for instance, that toolkit was validated this year, and we were able to pilot it in some countries like Nigeria, Tanzania, Kenya, to see how the farmers will add stories behind the numbers the government will be submitting to the African Union in terms of how they have performed in the CAADP implementation. And good thing, the African Union DRE department, working with us, have looked at this tool, and they feel is an important tool, participatory tool that would also help verify some of the information that is being given around from the different countries. And they've agreed that these documents will be uploaded on their website. So by and large, as the biennial review process goes on, or as CADIP is being implemented, people are able to take a tool that will suit their own need to now add their voice to issues that concerns them. And another one that also comes to mind is the project I run, I manage with my colleagues, that's the Public Financing for Agriculture, focuses on seeing how we bridge that gap between the food producers, in this case the women farmers, and policymakers in terms of pushing investment in agriculture, focusing on the issues of budget. So at the different levels, we try to see how we ensure that their voices are heard. Not just making budget, but what is that budget for? So one of the things we came up with was what we call the Agriculture People's Budget Summit. And we've done that within the East African community for the past 3 years or 4 years. And we've been able to work with the Yala Parliament to institutionalize a process where annually they create space for the different non-state actors, especially the women farmers, to come on the table to say, this is what we want to see in our budget. And they worked with us to go around the East African countries to consult before advising the countries on how to go about issues about budgeting. And we've just done the Median edition in West Africa with ECOWAS Parliament. And come December this year, the ECOWAS Parliament has also put it in their calendar, and that's going to happen. Okay. So those are the ways we feel that these processes can engender collaborative governance.
Thank you, Constance. And I just, some of my Africa Lead /Link colleagues, make sure that we follow up with Constance on some of these tools that she's talked about.
Yeah.
Really briefly. When you talk about sustainability, if the result is collaborating to develop a government-driven policy, that is sustainable as long as the government supports it. But by transferring the responsibility to civil society, you've transferred an asset, and that it makes it more sustainable and ensures the voices that you're talking about are heard. This goes beyond public-private partnerships. This is independent role in governing the process. So it's
a very good example of that sustainability. Yeah, thank you. We have a few minutes for a couple questions from the audience. So I'd like anyone who has a question to raise their hand, please. We'll just take one at a time. Yes, Courtney.
I have a question for, I guess anyone can answer it. Thank you. But hi, I'm Courtney Buck with the Bureau of Food Security on the policy team here in DC. So what do we do with some of these failures and trust is broken, and now this asset that we had that was holding things, very fragile things together, and it's been damaged, maybe in cases like Robert described. Then what do you do? And just maybe what some of your experiences have been, because there's obviously limits to just naming and shaming. At the same time, when trust has been damaged, the group, even if they convene and they try to move forward, if it's not addressed, what caused the problem? It could happen again. And so no one has faith maybe anymore that things are going to actually work again, because some members can go rogue, and if there are no sanctions, if there's no consequences, then how do you get that trust back? So maybe just any experiences with how you deal with those failures in a way that tries to address that trust issue without everything kind of unraveling.
I saw you.
Okay.
Robert.
Yes, I think, no, it's a really good question and also a really difficult one, because sometimes the process is completely broken and you can hardly correct what's gone wrong. But I think creating a culture of collaborative approaches in the general landscape is one way to address this, where people start to think that and to know and to expect that for major decisions, there will be collaborative governance approaches. If you look at countries like Kenya now, we even have in the constitution public participation as a requirement. And people can actually go to court and say, hey, you made that decision without consulting anyone. And the courts, in cases now have gone all the way up to the Supreme Court in the country, where the judges would say, hey, you got to go back on that decision because you didn't follow the process. So there is almost judicial solutions, but I think that there is also a cultural, behavioral solution and this is why, for example, the approach we have where we're talking about facilitative leadership, it's one of the things that could help to improve collaborative governance and some of the other topics. So it's a kind of a 360-degree approach to the problem. So I think, and always, I mean, we never give up. In the case of Kenya, it took another year and a half. People came back and talked and resocialized. So just going at it until something gives way could be helpful rather than giving up too early because you think the process cannot be rescued. These are some initial thoughts, but it's actually good food for thought about how we could.
Constance, you had a thought on that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, while I didn't earlier share an experience of where it failed, this question kind of brought about these thoughts. Some years back, when Nigeria was trying to sign up to the new alliance, we had consultations with the USAID team in Nigeria to see how the non-state actors platform, then we called it Agriculture Coalition, Civil Society Agri Coalition, before we metamorphosed into CNC. And it brought about over 40 non-state actors, mostly civil society groups, farmer groups, youth groups, and we used to come together, try to work with government. So when the issues of the new alliance was going to happen, one of the clauses that was put on the new alliance agreement and sign-ons had to do with inclusive participation. There had to be an evidence that each government consulted every constituency before they could come sign up to that. And the country had been working underground, no information. We didn't even know about it. We were hearing that there was something like New Alliance from other people, but we never knew Nigeria was even part of it. I think the time to the meeting was almost close, and they didn't know what to do. So USAID consulted us and said, oh, we needed you guys to see it and see how you talk to the government and talk about these issues. And we said, okay, fine. The government said, oh, we want a small group, that would discuss. And I was like, no, you can't get only the civil societies in the capital city because they are not representational enough. We have 36 states plus the FCT. If you want a full-fledged consultation that is real, we need to get everybody on board. And they agreed. Everybody came together. We had our discussions. But one thing we also did as non-state actors, like I was referring to Rick, was that while we partner with governments, we also don't lose that watchdog role as civil society. We knew that one of the greatest weapon, or not weapon, strength we would have was to bring in the media constituency to be part of the engagement, because they will keep record of what is happening, they will share information. And everybody was there. We had already had our planning meeting, and we told the government, this is a good idea, but there are gaps. We need to see certain elements of the alliance we are getting involved in. There are a lot of issues that you've not addressed. So we need to be sure that everybody that is going to be part of this process is properly consulted. And that you shouldn't go ahead and sign on. They agreed. The next thing, they fixed a meeting, and the next thing, we got over the news that our minister had gone over to London to sign on, and without living up to what we have agreed. We used the media, we went to the parliament, we were writing, blogging, consulting other bigger groups, and they had to call us back on the table. And we tried to resolve it by having a dialogue, and we ensured that they put an MOU down on partnership agreement, and that kind of helped build trust. So by and large now, we work very well with the National Federal Ministry of Agriculture, and most of the time they listen to what we have to say, and we also listen to them. We can disagree, fight, but at the end of the day, we all work towards achieving the same goal.
Thank you. Yeah. I think Rick has a...
Yeah, Courtney's point, I think you made a good point about name and shame, but it goes both ways. I think when you have public meetings, everyone's going to play to their constituency. They're going to play to their base. They're not going to try to actually solve the problem there. So there's a lot to be said about closing a door now and again, and using back channels. And let me give you an example where I'm not disagreeing that Watchdog isn't there, but if that's all you do, you've created a conflict and adversary relationship. I work for the Textile Industry Association here, and in the US, because health, safety, and welfare has devolved to the 50 states, That means there are 50 regulations regarding flammability for children's nightwear. And with 50 different states coming up, our members were faced with retardancy standards being set in New York that could only be met by using chemicals that were illegal in California. So what we did was we brought the heads of consumer protection from about 20 of the largest states, that count about 85% of the market, and asked them to come up with one set of rules. And we gave them a conference room in the Mayflower Hotel. We told them we would pay for their lunch. They didn't. For the next 3 days, you got all the time you want. But and if you need any resources, you need lawyers, you need chemists, we're here for you, we'll provide them. But before we left, we handed them 2 press releases from ATMI. One said, these organizations came together and put their differences aside to protect the American consumer and our children who need for their nightwear. The other one said, despite efforts by the industry to come up with a single set of standards that could result in affordable flammable standards that poor families could afford, they dug in their heels and we named names. Said, in 3 days, one of these 2 press releases is going out. It's up to you. And the point is that by doing it behind closed doors, they didn't circle the wagons. They knew what the threat was, but it was never made public. And that's why it worked.
Thank you, Rick. Maybe we can resume this in the afternoon, if it's okay. Anyway, I want to thank, I think our time has run out. It's probably about time for lunch. So I just want to say it's been a real honor to moderate this great panel. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
And I'd like, if you could, give them a hand as well. Thank you.